Hello CCHD family, welcome to our first CCHD video series aimed to strengthen our baptismal and faith commitment to address the root causes of poverty in America. My name is Hernandez and I am joined by Rauh McCloud, Director of the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, CCHD, and Jill Rauh, Director of Education and Outreach, to share with us an introduction to CCHD, its history, mission, and why this work is part of our Catholic discipleship. Rauh, thank you for being here. Jill, thank you for being here as well. So we will get started with a basic question, and is directed to you, Rauh, and I'm sure you have heard it and responded to it 100 of times. And the first question is, what is the Catholic Campaign for Human Development?
Sure. The Catholic Campaign for Human Development, or CCHD, is the official anti-poverty campaign of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. It was formed in 1969 and established in 1970 as an arm of the bishops to deal with poverty on local levels and empower low-income communities and transformational education.
Awesome. Thank you. So now the next question, it goes piggyback off question one, and to help give our diocesan directors an overall picture of CCHD, could you explain a little bit more about its history and mission?
Sure. Well, as you probably heard or probably read about what was happening or what was going on in 1969, we were just coming out of Vatican II, where the Church encouraged, inspired, challenged us to be more concerned about what was happening in the world to our brothers and sisters and acting on behalf of justice. But also happening in the United States, there was a great deal of political unrest, racial unrest, and high numbers of poverty. The bishops in their wisdom came together and decided, we have to do something about this. We have to think of a way that we might be able to supply some sort of support for those persons who are voiceless, who are unheard, who need the church's response in a time like this. And you'll recall that there were these high numbers of poverty, but also assassinations and violence that was happening all over the country. So the bishops in their wisdom said, let's create something, a way that we might be able to support these people in a way that's true to who we are as Catholics, that's true to who we are as Christians. Pope John Paul II, St. Pope John Paul II, actually commended the bishops for this back in 1979. And in 2021, Pope Francis, in the 50th anniversary, commended the Catholic Campaign for Human Development for its work over the last 50 years.
Awesome. Wonderful. So from what I'm hearing you say is that CCHD has a long history of bringing into practice what the Gospel of Matthew tells us, which is whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me. Many people know that the Church has been responding to poverty since its inception, as you have well described. Jesus, as we know, was regularly hanging out with the poor. In fact, Jesus himself was poor. So a poverty response on behalf of the Church is nothing new. But what can you tell us, and this question will be directed to Jill, of how CCHD fits into the Church's response, broader response to poverty?
Yeah, thanks, Helder, and it's great to be here with both of you. I was reflecting on a quote from St. Paul VI from Evangelii Nuntiandi on proclaiming the gospel, evangelization of the modern world. And what he does in that document is he makes a connection between evangelization and helping all of us to know Christ better, and the work that we have to also liberate from inequality, from poverty, and from those systems and structures that prevent us from thriving and from living out our integral human development. And so I think with that in mind, that is CCHD's work. It's the work of evangelization. And it's a particular type of evangelization, which is helping to create a more just world in which families and communities can have every member thrive. CCHD's work is a little different from most of the anti-poverty work that we often are familiar with. We see a lot of wonderful work happening by our beloved Catholic Charities agencies, St. Vincent de Paul, Catholic Relief Services overseas, that is oriented towards addressing the immediate and basic needs of families so that they can have enough food to eat, have shelter, right, and to be able to care for their families. CCHD is oriented towards the long term, towards the systemic, towards creating conditions and addressing the causes of some of those situations that prevent families from thriving, so that in the long term, communities can be more just and fair and equitable. You've probably heard many times the 2 feet of love in action. That's a model that we use at the USCCB and in many dioceses around the country, where we talk about charitable works as the meeting of basic needs of families and individuals, and CCHD's approach, which would be more the social justice foot, where we're addressing root causes, looking at long-term solutions, trying to change those obstacles to thriving that keep us from living out our dignity and in ways our dignity can be recognized.
Awesome. Thank you for that explanation. And it is thrilling to hear you say and highlight the diversity of ministries that are present within our church, and even more joyful to hear you and to know the oneness of our church's mission to respond to poverty. I know you mentioned and described the distinction between these other organizations in highlighting the work of CCHD, but I want to give you the opportunity as well to share with us, if you want to leave our audience with a main distinction or something that the diocesan directors, for example, may be able to share and explain to their local community of what distinguishes CCHD from the other organizations that you have mentioned, or any other organization that they may be well known in their local community.
Yeah, so I think this is where storytelling can come in, right? I love telling stories, working in the area of education and outreach. And so let me put a face on what I'm trying to articulate by talking about the 2 feet of love in action. And in particular, that foot that walks with social justice and tries to address systems and institutions that need our evangelization. So I like to tell a story that was shared with me by the pastor of a parish in the sector of DC that is the most impoverished. He talks about working with his parish after there was a shooting and a woman killed in the parking lot outside his church. It was a neighborhood that experienced a lot of crime. Discerning with his lay leadership, what is the response that we should have? And they didn't discern that the end of their response, I think it probably was included in the start of their response, to go and visit those who were grieving and to provide some of the more charitable services. What they discerned was that they needed to engage in work that could help the word become flesh, this pastor tells me, in the neighborhood in a way that was transformative, in a way that would help make long-term permanent solutions that could actually get at the root of some of these causes. And so they went out in the neighborhood, they did listening, they identified what were some of the daily experiences that people had to endure in the neighborhood in terms of violence and lack of opportunity for children in terms of good schools or access to employment. The relationship with the law enforcement not being great, right? And so they identified some of these things, and then they analyzed who are the decision makers that can affect some of these aspects of the situation. They built relationships, they empowered leaders from the community, they told their stories, and they were able to be successful at getting a lot of new resources and attention from the city in a neighborhood that was neglected before. It resulted in a new community center being built. It resulted in better relationship with the law enforcement and the community being able to have access to new services and new resources in a more systemic way that could help to get at the causes of some of those situations in a more comprehensive way. So that's maybe a good example of that more sort of comprehensive long-term solution versus the equally wonderful but different and done by some other organizations of the more charitable responses.
Awesome, thank you. It is it's just amazing to hear both of you share about this type of work, about bringing that faith into action. in ensuring that our church has not remained and cannot remain indifferent to social matters in order to meet the signs of times. And that example that you shared about the parish, we can even say that that is an example, a demonstration of what CCHD looks like today. The examples that you've shared, these are examples that are, going on nationwide. It doesn't matter your background, it doesn't matter, the language, your culture. These are things that are happening just around the corner. But now, Rauh, I'm gonna segue, over to you. Most people know about CCHD, we could say, and if they know anything about CCHD, is about the grant funding that CCHD makes possible. So if you could share with us about what these CCHD grants are about.
Sure, I'm happy to. Many folks refer to CCHD as being a hand up instead of a handout. And I like to take another popular parable, and say CCHD is not just teaching a person to fish, but it's like teaching entire communities to fish, where they teach each other to fish, where they come together, they convene, they find out what their needs are, and identify them in a way. And we're blessed, we're honored to be able to help support some of those efforts based on what they're saying themselves. We have two streams of grants, if you will. There's the community development grants that encourages folks to come together, to convene, identify problems and issues that are keeping them in poverty, and empowers those people, or maybe even more importantly, reminds them of the power that they already have because of no reason other than that they're made in the image and likeness of God. And because of that, they come together, identify issues, and learn about them in a way that they might be able to confront them. Then there's the economic development arm, and these are dealing with the economy that keeps low-income people in poverty. Things like employment, things like we support worker-owned co-ops, we support community development financial institutions, we'll support community land trusts to make sure that housing prices are able to stay low, that families might be able to afford them, and plant roots in communities that might be able to allow the neighborhood to grow. All of these grants, we've done over 12,000 grants over the last 50 years, somewhere near $440 million worth of grants, and each one of them has had the express approval of a local diocesan bishop before any support can be given. It's part of the criteria for funding CCHD grants. We hold the grantees to the highest accountability that makes sure that they are conforming with the conferences, the Catholic churches, Catholic social teaching, to make sure that they are conforming with some of the criteria, both that the church requires, but also legal criteria. And we insisted on that, and we're very, very insistent. One of the biggest criteria is that they have to be the voices of the organization itself have to be low income. That's something that we insist on. It's a non-negotiable, if you will, that we want to hear from the people themselves of what it is that's keeping them in poverty.
Great, awesome. Thank you. And Jill, you highlighted on something, and I think it goes with what we're talking about, and it's that bringing that faith into action. And the sacramental mission, we could say. What can you share with us about being missionary disciples who encounter those in the peripheries and how that is aligned with CCHD?
Yeah, thanks, Helder. So I think it starts with our baptismal call, right? We're baptized into one member, to be a member of one body in Christ. And then in that, we become members of one another. We take on Christ's mission to be disciples in the world and to go out outside the parish doors, not to just stay within, but to go out and to bring the good news into the neighborhood. Similarly, when we celebrate the Eucharist every Sunday, we gather at the altar, we receive Christ in the Eucharist, and then we are called to become the Eucharist in the world. We're sent out. We go through those doors and we go into the neighborhood around us. There are 1,200 parishes across the United States that are members of CCHD funded groups. There are 950 clergy and religious that are part of those groups, along with thousands and thousands of lay Catholics. My own parish is a member of a CCHD funded group, Action in Montgomery. My parish is St. Camillus in Silver Spring, and I was previously involved with another CCHD funded group when I lived in Washington, D.C. at my parish there. And I think the experience of missionary discipleship is real when we engage with CCHD. I think that the work of community development, which is my own experience, is one in which we connect with our fellow parishioners and with people in the neighborhood as we develop relationships with them, as we do listening, as we have one-to-one relational meetings to learn about, ask each other questions about what affects you and your family, what is keeping one another from thriving, right? What are the top issues that are affecting us? We're also listening with the desire to identify leaders, to help our fellow brothers and sisters to live out their God-given dignity by developing their voices, by learning how to raise those concerns to those who are in power, and to develop a different type of power that we contribute to as people of faith, which I've heard called, and I love this, love thy neighbor power, right? That's what we're going for with CCHD funded groups. We're going with Holy Spirit power. We see something that is impeding the thriving and the dignity from being recognized of people in the community, and then we're coming together, oftentimes with people of other faith communities too, with the Lutheran church down the street, with the synagogue, with the mosque, with sometimes even secular organizations like a school in the neighborhood, right? Everybody has this common concern. And so how can we strive towards unity? How can we evangelize in a way? Because we're living our faith when we're present in those circumstances. And then we're coming together to really think strategically about how we can impact those situations that impact families and their abilities to thrive. So it is so connected to missionary discipleship. I love that question.
Awesome. Love it. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt that the Holy Spirit is present, because you tied in with one of the questions, which is just highlighting what the parish is all about. As you well said, bringing that faith into action, not necessarily just by attending Mass, but how we are called, to take what we receive during Mass out for others to experience what we receive and experience as Christian Catholics.
And then we come back to Mass and we get fed so we can do it again. Because if we don't, then we're not fed and we can't keep it up. So it's a cycle. Yeah.
Well said. So it's just amazing just to hear the stories and very touching. Because again, this goes back to that principle of the dignity of the human being. That it's like there's someone that needs to encounter Christ, that needs to know that there's hope, that we are willing and able to walk together. And you very well explained, the example, with the CCHD funded group that you are, with. But I also want to ask Rauh the following question, because Jill has shared with us the examples of what goes on in the community. But I do want to hear from you about the victories that have evolved throughout time, through the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, through the CCHD funded organizations, through their inspiring work that has helped them to live the gospel and the values of our Catholic social tradition in their communities.
Sure, I'm happy to, but I just have to mention, Jill made me think of, my parish too is very involved with a CCHD funded group. And I have to say that because they are, the parish is stronger. They're more active inside the walls of the church, but they're also very active outside in the community. So much so that in the back of our church, in the back of our parish, instead of having an exit sign, we have a servant's entrance sign, that we are going out into a world to be of servants, and it's a reminder. It's a reminder of our responsibility to the local community, but it's all because of our involvement with Catholic Campaign for Human Development funded groups, and we're on different sides of the town. So these are two different organizations and two different parishes, obviously. But in terms of your question, in terms of asking the victories, I mean, there are thousands. Yeah. There are thousands, and I think instead of identifying them as victims, I mean, the number of lives that have been enhanced, and in many cases, lives that have been saved, are just incredible. And the church has something that that we can be incredibly proud of because of our participation. I would just mention a couple of organizations. One is the Living Hope Wheelchair Association that's down in Texas. They're made up of immigrants and refugees who are disabled, who have spinal injuries. And because of their spinal injuries, they're not able to access some of the benefits that the county gives because of their status, their immigration status. They were denied them, but they came together. They convened, they talked about the issue, they looked at ways that they might be able to confront the institution and government officials. They might be able to not just get the kind of benefits that they needed for themselves, but also for the broader community. So the entire family was able to benefit from some of the work that they were doing. Wonderful, wonderful work. Another organization I think of is Parents United for Change. These are some African American families, particularly mothers who are down in St. Louis, who are doing tremendous work. And they came together and decided, that they were not going to be content with the way that the neighborhoods were, the schools were, the public safety were, that they were going to do what they can to deal with and confront the issues. So they learned what the issues were. They learned what some of the possibilities were. They learned some ways that they were being slighted. And they were able to deal with that in a very public way, and they were able to grow. So much so they were able to get funding for 2,000 school children to be able to attend the kind of after-school programs that they needed. So imagine that, 2,000 school, Parents United for Change down in St. Louis. Another organization that comes to mind is Opportunity Threads. It's in North Carolina. It started out as a very small cut and sew organization. 4 people came together and said, we're going to create our own company. And imagine, the awesome nature of thinking you're going to form a company with 4 people. These were immigrants who were having difficulty finding work. Mm-hmm. But they were in the textile industry that overwhelmed them. But they grew and they grew and they grew and they grew. But they wanted to be self-determinant about how they were able to have the kind of resources and work and benefits that the number of hours that they were working, and those kinds of things. And because they wanted to be self-determined, they grew to a number of around 40 of them now. And they're able to decide what their working hours, what their working conditions, what their benefits are going to be. So in that sense, they've embraced in a very real way Catholic social teaching, the whole idea of the rights and dignity of workers. The Parents United for Change embraced the Catholic social teaching principle of preferential option for the poor. They embraced the whole importance of rights and responsibilities. Instead of suggesting that someone else do it, they rolled up their sleeves and put their hands and their hearts into the work themselves. The Living Hope Wheelchair Association are able to live up to a human dignity that God wants all of us to live up to. And they were able to live dignified lives because they came together. So Catholic Campaign for Human Development embraces Catholic social teaching, and it manifests itself in so many ways. It manifests itself in ways that, because of the founding of the voices of these organizations having to be the institutions of the organizations and the people themselves, that there's a sense of subsidiarity, that the voices of the people who are closest to the issue, they're the ones who determine how the organization is going to work. It's not from top down. It comes from as Pope Francis invites all of us to listen to those folks who are most involved with the situation. So the principle of subsidiarity is taken. The Opportunity Threads also formed they joined a co-op organization created a co-op organization where they have another organization that's there that helps recycle textiles. And so in that way, they're embracing the whole care for creation principle. So we're there as the Catholic Campaign for Human Development. We're there in embracing Catholic social teaching on just about every principle that you can think of.
Awesome. It's just marvelous. It's wonderful. I think I could ask you more and more and more, to keep the conversation going. And it's just amazing how the groups that you have referenced, how they live out those Catholic social teaching principles.
And that's just a sample. I mean, there's obviously thousands and thousands of others, but they all have those principles that are kind of their foundation that undergoes one or the other. Probably not all of them, but one of the other principles they've actually embraced and decided that's what they're going to work on.
There, as I said at the beginning, many ministries, one mission. Many areas, one mission. And I'm sure that our audience and even diocesan directors or anyone who wants to learn or first time, hearing or wanting to know about CCHD, about the groups that you've mentioned, but also about Catholic social teaching and how Catholic social teaching is tied with CCHD. I would like to ask you, what resources can you share with us so that those that are listening in can reference and even use in their local communities to share with others so that more people could learn about this work and become involved?
Yeah, thanks, Helder. There's a lot of stories about CCHD on the Poverty USA and PobreceUSA.org websites. If you want stories, that is the place to go, as well as following us on social media. We are constantly sharing stories about what's happening in the field. For a person who is coordinating the Catholic Campaign for Human Development work in their diocese, there's a special page on the CCHD website called the Diocesan Director's Corner, and that is really the best place to go because it has a number of different resources that are posted there or links to other places on our website. One of my favorites is called CCHD Rooted in Our Catholic Identity. It's a manual for diocesan coordinators of CCHD. It walks through in detail all of the things that we've talked about in this conversation today. In addition, you can find other materials about what CCHD funds, who CCHD is, our funding criteria, the process of approval with the bishop that is utilized. And then we also have some links to other resources that are on social mission more broadly, but which are really applicable to this conversation on the resources and tools page of the Justice, Peace, and Human Development website. That is also linked from the Diocesan Director's Corner, but we have Catholic social teaching materials. We have a publication called Sacraments and Social Mission that is available for download. Just so much there that can help someone to share this with others that they may be working with.
Great. And along those lines, if someone goes to the website and all of a sudden they have another pending question that they're like, okay, but I have a question about what's on this website, but I need to speak to someone. Who is the best point of contact for diocesan directors or just anyone who may have a question in regards to the resources that you have laid out or just any other question that they may have?
Sure, yeah. So the country is divided into 5 regions, and there's a regional grant specialist for each of the regions. You can find those listed on the website, and so they would be a great kind of go-to for questions from a particular part of the country. There's also the education and outreach staff, including you and I and several others, Helder, that they can also find the contact information for. If there's somebody who's in a diocese and they're not the one coordinating CCHD, but they want to get involved, they can also find a list of all the diocesan coordinators for CCHD so that they know who to contact locally.
Awesome. So there's an answer to every question or just a point of contact for anyone who wants to become involved or know more about it. So thank you to both of you for sharing your wisdom as well as your contact information and who to go to when it comes to questions and resources. I would like to provide you with the opportunity for any parting words that you may have for us, and I'll start with you, Jill.
Yeah. If you want to know more about CCHD, see what's happening locally and get involved. That'd be my number one recommendation, awesome. Right? Like there's so many amazing things happening through funded groups. Pope Francis calls us to encounter, to relationship, to overcoming isolation, to conversation and dialogue, right? So identify what's happening locally and just start listening. That will tell you what CCHD is and what we're about.
Well said. Rauh.
Jill said it all. CCHD is unique. It's so unique in that we find ourselves working with people of different ethnicities, different faith groups. And man, because of our presence there, because of our presence and our witness, we're able to influence society in a way people look at us and say, the Catholic Church is concerned about me when I was poor. The Catholic Church was concerned about me when I was unemployed. The Catholic Church was concerned about me when I found myself in a dire situation. And not only did they want to come and do some charitable things, They encouraged me to find my voice. They encouraged me to participate. They encouraged me to deal with the issues and the systems that were keeping me and my family, sometimes for generations, in poverty. And I think that that's something that we can be proud of, that the Catholic Campaign for Human Development, the gift that the bishops some 50 years ago has given us to work with.
Awesome, awesome. It's amazing. Again, thank you to both of you and to your team for sharing the good news about CCHD and how it is a joyful expression of living the gospel. Thank you to those who have joined us. And please visit the Diocesan Directors Corner on the USCCB webpage for CCHD information and our JPHD website as well, which will appear on the screen. Please stay tuned for the other sessions in these series that will dive into the nuts and bolts of CCHD to prepare you for this important work of discipleship. Thank you.